Hello, everyone. Welcome to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar broadcast. Whether you are taking part in the live webinar today or listening to the webinar replay or podcast a few days or weeks from now, you'll find today's topic, the link between ADHD and anxiety, of great interest. Before we get started, let me note a couple of housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources tab of your webinar screen. For new information on how to purchase the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive directly at the end of the webinar. For those of you listening to the broadcast in replay or podcast mode, please log on to the webinar replay page on the Attitude website. That URL is www.attitudemag.com/webinar/coping-with-anxiety for access to both the accompanying slides and the Certificate of Attendance option. Now for today's topic, ADHD and anxiety. Anxiety is ADHD's most common comorbid condition. Research shows that emotional regulation difficulties play a central role in sparking anxiety in adults with ADHD. Over the last 4 months, these challenges have felt overwhelming as we've worried about the global pandemic and how it might affect our lives and our families. Today, ADHD expert J. Russell Ramsay outlines how these worries affect ADHD symptoms and coping strategies during these unprecedented times, how to handle anxiety effectively, and how to push beyond our fears to achieve a resilient mindset. The bottom line, adults with ADHD can develop skills to manage anxious feelings instead of allowing them to rule our lives. Dr. Ramsay is co-founder and co-director of the University of Pennsylvania's Adult ADHD Treatment and Research Program and an associate professor of clinical psychology and psychiatry in the University of Pennsylvania's Perelman School of Medicine. He has authored 5 books and numerous peer-reviewed professional and scientific articles, research abstracts, as well as many book chapters on issues related to adult ADHD. His latest book is Rethinking Adult ADHD, Helping Clients Turn Intentions into Actions. Now, you can ask questions of Dr. Ramsay during his presentation, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can after he finishes. That all being said, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ramsay. Thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. And you can see the objectives up there. And the thing about dealing with the COVID-19 restrictions, this has hit everybody. So a lot of these coping ideas, anybody could benefit from. It's been like a snow globe that's really shaken up our lives. And so anybody can benefit from them, but that's often something you hear about any self-help book for adult ADHD or the coping strategies. There's no trade secrets, and people will say, well, using a planner, dealing with procrastination, doesn't that help everybody? Absolutely. But these are all more essential for individuals with ADHD. And it's a reminder how ADHD is a quantitative condition, not a qualitative one. It's a degree of magnitude. So it's a chronic developmental delay in these normative self-regulation strategies. How efficiently do we do what we set out to do? Which is a really fancy way of saying the time management, dealing with procrastination, emotional regulation. These all help us out in day-to-day life. And now COVID is like the biggest midterm exam ever for, okay, let's radically change things. Now, we all vary. Some of us, we were talking before the webinar, my job as a psychologist, rather than sitting in a room across from somebody, I'm sitting just across a screen from somebody. So it's translated pretty well, at least in my work, but with some changes. But for a lot of people, it's changed radically. So, and in talking about the topic of anxiety, well, anxiety, when things are unfamiliar, they're uncertain. And when they're uncertain, we're more likely to feel uncomfortable or anxious. So that's why anxiety is such a hot topic right now. And even more so, there's a specific ADHD and anxiety connection that we'll start off with. Also looking at anxiety during the COVID pandemic and the various lockdown and adjustments everybody's had to make. And then lastly, and most importantly, there's always the clinical so what question with all this stuff. How do we take that knowledge and put it into action? So starting off with what is the connection, and it pre-existed COVID. Anxiety is the most common coexisting diagnosis with adult ADHD, and even across from any sort of diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. Even people will say, no, I'm not particularly anxious, but there is commonly situationally based anxiety. The student who's not really anxious until around midterms, until the paper is assigned and due. These things that anxiety itself makes more difficult. And that's why, for my money, anxiety is the most common coexisting condition. ADHD makes life a lot more difficult than for individuals without ADHD. Things that other people take for granted, being on time, breaking down tasks, being able to pay attention, be able to comprehend and remember what you've read for the exam. A lot of things then are fraught with more uncertainty, and with that uncertainty comes greater anxiety, at least reticence, and even in low levels, mild discomfort. And that's an important point about anxiety. The traditional view of the common theme of anxiety is that it's the perception of threat or risk, danger. And that is still the case. And even if somebody is 99% sure the risk isn't going to happen, it's the 1% what if possibility that creates the anxiety. Yeah, but what if this happens? And it's the possibility, the uncertainty associated with the possibility of something bad coming. That's what fuels the anxiety. But we now know from research on anxiety that it's really the core theme is the underlying uncertainty. I can't know for sure. I know airline travel is the safest form of transportation, but you can't guarantee me that this one's not going down, which is true. We cannot, there's no ironclad risk-free guarantee, but we know living in the probabilities rather than the possibilities is one way to transcend anxiety. But there's still that uncertainty, and that's part of the task of living with ADHD is how do we manage the uncertainty? And in general, even people without ADHD with anxiety disorders, that is the core theme. Now, we use anxiety all over the place, anxious about this, anxious about that, including, and it's something I have to remind my clients, we even use it for positive things like positive excitement. I'm anxious for the long weekend coming up. I'm anxious to go on vacation. So just splitting out a little terminology, stress is generally a physiological response to external events, and it's not a bad thing. Stress is what gets us up in the morning. Stress is what gets us to do things. Even positive things can be stressful. And I think if you've ever taken a Psych 101 class, there's the inverted U curve, where on the left, on the x-axis from left to right, it's low stress to high stress. And the height of the curve, where the curve goes up, is a measure of performance. So too little stress, you don't study for the test, you don't prepare for the music recital, you don't train for the sport. Too much stress, you overtrain, you overstudy, you stress out, you second guess yourself. There's a sweet spot right in the middle for stress. So stress isn't a bad thing, and even positive things, getting a promotion, a new job, moving to a new house can be stressful, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Worry. You know what? Ned Hallowell, Driven to Distraction, I think you've heard of him. I think his book after Driven to Distraction was actually a book on worry. But worry is more cognitive, the rumination about something realistic. Oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe I better book my flight now. I hope the prices haven't gone up. I hope I get a flight not too early, not too late, whatever. I hope it lands at whatever time. So that sort of worry about realistic things. And we may not feel it too much physically, like rapid heart rate, but it's sort of on our mind. It's more ruminative. Oh, I better get around to it. I better get around to it. Hopefully it makes us get around to it, which is adaptive coping. So actually, the first pass of worry really isn't worry, it's problem solving. Again, which is a good thing. Okay, my cell phone is down to 10%. Tell you what, maybe I better find an outlet and plug it in for at least 20 minutes for the ride home. That's problem solving. Now, if we ruminate about it and we keep going back without taking action, it can become worry. And gone too far, worry can turn into anxiety, where there's the cognitive aspect, but now there's also the physiological, feeling tense, maybe rapid heart rate. Some people get GI distress, upset stomach, muscle tension from subtle muscle tension, like in shoulders and the jaw. And it's a vaguer, broader worry about something upcoming. So going about the worry about the flight, then there might be, what if the flight is canceled? What if I don't arrive on the same day? What if I can't get another flight the same day? What if I miss, my talk or something like that? So it's all possible, but broader, vaguer, maybe a little less specific, still statistically unlikely, but possible. Then fear is actually facing the threat. So worry might be about flying or about a flight being canceled. The fear is actually, guess what? Your flight is canceled. Or, oh my gosh, I'm getting on a plane. This thing looks really heavy. How do these things stay in the air? I'm really worried. Now, with ADHD, a lot of these things that I just mentioned could be considered somewhat neurotic and maybe based on past experiences, bad experiences. And that's the thing about ADHD. A lot of times when somebody's citing a worry to me, they are very often tied in with real experiences. So somebody without ADHD, a college freshman says, I'm worried about failing out of the class. What is the evidence? The work's really hard. My first test is a B+, and I'm used to getting A's. I'm sort of worried, but we can look at the evidence and say, no, you're going to pass. You might want to do better on your next exam, and are there things you can do differently? But usually not worried about failing. The student with ADHD, when I ask about the evidence, it might be, I failed the first test and the second test, and I haven't handed in assignments, and I have a history of having problems with in-class exams. Now there's more life evidence. Now the conclusion isn't, you're going to fail. Let's come up with a different profession. But it may be problem-solving, coping skills around, okay, let's study differently and the like. Things that you can do, take action to decrease the anxiety. So there is adaptive anxiety. Anxiety is information. The capacity to feel these emotions is very adaptive. So if we can think about it, what is the signal telling us? So if we're anxious about the exam because we haven't studied yet, we've got a great solution. Study for the exam. You'll feel better. You'll be better prepared. So ideally, this signal motivates us to action. It could be approach. Okay, approach the studying, use your coping skills. It can be avoidance sometimes. Hey, it looks like there's an accident up there. Maybe we should get off the road and take an exit. Or there's a danger sign. Maybe we should avoid what is listed as a danger. Now, a common theme of ADHD, and this goes back to what I said before, ADHD is tailor-made for anxiety because things that seem pretty straightforward often can be problematic. I will say the kid with ADHD is not a knowledge problem, it's a performance problem. So you take the child, a 7-year-old with ADHD, and ask them, what are you supposed to do in class when a teacher asks a question? Raise your hand and wait to be called on. They will answer it 100% of the time. But in real time, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? July 4th, 1776. The performance is the difficulty. So it's not a knowledge problem, it's a performance problem. And that's what's so maddening about ADHD, particularly in adulthood. I know what I need to do, but I just don't do it. It's a performance problem, not a knowledge problem. So ADHD plus anxiety, I know I need to do something, but my consistent inconsistency leaves me doubting, am I going to be able to make myself do it when I have to do it? I know all the coping skills, break things down, start early, but am I going to be in the mood? Am I going to be able to focus? Am I going to be able to resist distraction? And that uncertainty, I know I can do it, but I'm not sure if I can do it then. Or sometimes I can do it really well, but other times, one time I can finish a paper, a 2-page paper in less than an hour. Another time it can take me six hours. I don't know which is which. How's that going to affect me when I try to do it? I'm not sure. Uncertainty equals anxiety. So, in terms of the cognitions in ADHD, and this was really the focus of my most recent book, The Rethinking Adult ADHD, asking, there are cognitive themes. I mentioned the cognitive theme for anxiety is managing uncertainty. I can't be 100% sure, but how do I manage that uncertainty? And are there things I can do to nudge the percentages even more in my favor? With ADHD, I make the conjecture that due to that consistent inconsistency, it is self-distrust or mistrust. Distrust is the automatic thoughts. That's more of a local issue. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it today. And mistrust is that more global, I know I can do it, but I'm just in general not sure if I'm going to be able to get myself to do it. I know the assignment's coming up, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make the deadline. I know I can do this, but I'm not sure if I can do it or make myself do it now or when I have to do it. And that's a self-regulatory efficacy issue. Now, there's also some other cognitive themes of incautious optimism, which is actually distorted positive thoughts. I work best at the last minute. I know this usually sucks me in, but I'll just do it for a little bit and then I'll get on task. And if we do, there's no problem. But these are like rationalizations, using logic to do something illogical. Gamblers are very positive thinkers, but it's not very adaptive. And then front-end perfectionism, that we found to be the most common distorted automatic thought endorsed by adults with ADHD. And this, well, the perfectionism was, and my conjecture on that study was, it's really front-end perfectionism. I have to be in the mood to do something. I have to have enough energy. Circumstances have to be just right. And there is a degree of truth for ADHD, trying to be in a distraction-reduced setting. But we're probably never going to eliminate distractions, and we'll never be in my life, I was never in the mood to do homework. And we may not be totally energized, but we can have enough energy. So there's more of a sufficiency reframe in order to get engaged. And once we're engaged, at least now we have a fighter's chance of making progress. It's not anywhere in the official diagnostic criteria, but emotional discontrol is a core feature of ADHD. And so part of managing anxiety is being able to change our emotional state, up-regulating task-oriented emotions and positive reasons for doing things, and down-regulating the physiological stress reactions, the emotional anxiety reactions, not eliminating them. You don't have to be the Dalai Lama, but getting them within boundaries where we can still engage in the task. And for ADHD, I think the main emotional theme or emotional task is managing discomfort. We call it, it's not a true emotion, but we call it one, the emotion of ugh, I don't feel like doing homework, but we still have to engage. But what happens is the thoughts intertwine with the emotions lead to avoidance, escape, delay, which is probably the most common behavioral theme in ADHD, only magnified by anxiety. Anxiety in ADHD is like trying to put out fire with gasoline. So that's the ADHD anxiety connection. And another way to frame it, and again, this is developmental conjecture, anxiety is an adaptive motivational emotion. That's what happens the night before the exam, where there's motivation all over the place. It's panic. I have to study now. And that gives great clarity for either studying for the final that's like 12 hours away at 8 a.m., all of a sudden being able to write the 5-page papers, because all of a sudden the perfectionistic editor is fired. And it's just like, I need to throw words down. So my conjecture, what happens with folks with ADHD, school is hard. So it takes more and more anxiety to get started. But school only gets more difficult through middle school, high school, post-secondary school, or entering the workplace, where it takes more and more anxiety. And maybe at some point, the anxiety is so much or overwhelming somebody starts giving up or missing deadlines, and then things start snowballing a little bit. So now all of a sudden anxiety becomes associated with all these tasks and becomes its own problem on top of anxiety. It seems to mimic what I hear people say, but it's still a hypothesis to be tested. Now, with anxiety being a common motivator, what has happened with COVID where all of a sudden our schedules and our habits get overturned? So this list would probably be apropos for anybody, ADHD or not. But like I said, ADHD is a quantitative problem, not a qualitative one. And so these are even more so, require more coping for folks with ADHD. So one, parents all of a sudden having to, while working at home, also help children with school and other activities and childcare, double duty. It's almost like trying to work two jobs at once. And parents generally do not make good teachers or tutors. And even parents who work as teachers say, I'm not as good a teacher for my child student as I am for my students. So one, that's an added source of stress, as well as anxiety in terms of thoughts about, well, what if I don't do a good job teaching? What's going to happen to my middle schooler if they don't pass trigonometry? Will they get into a good college? Now, again, we can work those backwards, and we'll talk about that in the cognitive section. But these are some of the anxieties that can come up. And like I said, gasoline on fire. Just the stress of working remotely from home with distractions, competing with space with everybody else in the household. All of a sudden now your house, or apartment becomes also a workplace for at least two wage earners, a school for one or two, if not more, students. So it's sort of like a Swiss Army knife of having to do so many different things. And maybe there's competition for, space, Wi-Fi connections, including some people who don't have good Wi-Fi at home or maybe Wi-Fi at all. They're doing their work in their cars outside Kmart or something, siphoning off the Wi-Fi there. And actually that's happened. I had a session with a client whose power was out due to a storm in her car outside a store. And all this leads to heightened family conflicts for which managing ADHD, parental ADHD, child ADHD, and particularly when both coexist, more likely to be reactive to stress and the change in routine and the increased demands all over the place. So it increases the likelihood of short tempers and overreactions. For some people, it's isolation, single, unattached, living alone in a studio apartment and trying to have to amuse yourself with all the limitations going on. So there's also, at the same time, there are limited social buffers, having time alone, which we all need to regenerate and replenish. We're always around other people. Again, some people have the opposite problem of almost like being like Tom Hanks in Castaway. There's nobody around and you're talking to your volleyball or something like that, Wilson. There's also fewer non-screen activities. It sounds like a beautiful thing. Oh, finally, don't have to go to work, or I'm done with school. I don't have to go back to my dorm room. I can be on my phone or my screen more often. As soon as there's fewer options for other things, all of a sudden it's not as fun after 3 months. So this overall loss of scaffolding, as much as we rail against it, school, work, yoga class, these all give us a reason to get up, a positive stress. And not having it. And this is true of anyone. Somebody who retires, who says for the first week or two, it's great not having to run into the office. And then all of a sudden you're wandering around saying, what do I do when? I don't have to do anything now. So that's a big source of stress. And within COVID, we can joke around by about working at home and all the difficulties there. Some people are actually facing a job loss or an income loss at the same time all these things are going on. So there's a different vector of stress and anxiety. Health issues, just generally managing chronic health demands, getting in for allergy shots, and maybe even somebody who does test positive for COVID and now has to quarantine on top of everything. And life still happens during COVID. Graduations get missed or are not held. People die. Weddings are changed. Somebody who, a child with autistic spectrum problems who doesn't do well without structure, there are all these other perturbations in what's going on. So loss, grief, boredom, access to care and medications, coping skills for this new world, if you will. How do I cope? It was difficult enough to cope by myself with homework. How do I do that with my parents around all the time? All of this adds to uncertainty, not knowing how to manage things. So I've sort of described the water you might feel like you're drowning in. What do we do? There's probably, these will be very familiar things, but they're even more important now and reestablishing them in the new reality. So there's no way around it. Structuring unstructured time, a schedule, an external schedule. If you live and work alone, this will be beneficial for you until it becomes more muscle memory. But especially if you have others in the household, classes, having to get on the Wi-Fi or on the one computer that might be around, whatever, it's really useful to have it externalized. It could be an appointment planner. It could be a calendar on the wall. It could be a digital calendar that's just kept open on the iPad while you're doing other things. The calendar, the planner, is a time machine. It lets us look ahead to 2 hours from now, 2 days from now, 2 weeks from now, both to prime us for what we plan to do. And it's also a motivator. If we go to bed the night before with the plan the next day of what we're going to do moving through the day, including when are our breaks, when's the end of the day, when do we have free time and the day is over and we're free and clear. These are things that all are ways to manufacture motivation. And motivation can be resignation. Oh, I just have to do this to get it done because it's a have to. That's motivation. It's not the most inspiring thing. It would be a great self-help book if I ever write it. Resignation, the new motivational self-help. It would probably sell just on the title alone, but that helps us get things done. Excuse me if that showed up. And with these tasks, specificity, actually defining the task in behavioral terms. What is it I'm going to do? Homework? That might make sense for a lot of people. Do homework and you can break it down in your mind, but then it may have to be, what assignment am I starting with? Reading the chapter, the problem set, outlining the paper. Specificity helps. And if you're having a hard time getting started on homework, defining what homework is. Defining, okay, what is the first thing I'm going to do, which is a backdoor to that specificity. And also, is it a time-based objective? I'm going to work on the reading for 15 minutes, or is it going to be task-based, 15 pages? And it's probably better to err on the side of less rather than more. And this could be for work tasks, checking up on emails, reaching out to clients, whatever the case may be. So creating bounded tasks within the schedule to see the other end, the stop time. It's sort of like jumping into the pool. If you were dropped in the middle of the ocean and told swim, you have no reference point. Do I just want to doggy paddle and stay afloat? Or just beyond the horizon within reasonable distance if I swim at a slow and steady pace? You don't know. But if you're in a swimming pool where you see the edge, you can calibrate how far. And even if you're tired, you go, I can hang on for 10 more yards, 10 more meters. And even if you're tired at the end of the hour, you might say, okay, 2 more pages, then I'm done. 5 more minutes, then I'm done. Plan breaks. It is crucially important to have downtime. Breaks during the day, time for exercise, movement and activity. It could be the walk around the block. There's research to say just getting up and standing up once an hour and stretching those muscles. We're not designed to stay seated all the time. So even if it's walking up and down stairs, doubling up with a chore of walking the dog, whatever, it all helps. So movement helps. Planning your online therapy appointments, be it as a therapist or the other side, taking a break if that's your treatment. Sleep times, both getting in the bed with a plan of going to sleep, getting up in the morning, and maybe meal plan, really choreographing the day, including brainstorming with other options, say for learning activities like museums that are giving virtual tours. There may be some new options. and to replace some of the many typical options we would do, like yoga class, going to the coffee shop to do work, that at least up until recent days have not been an option. And also organizing your physical space, defining where are you going to do work, and when you leave there, that means you're leaving work. Where are you going to study? Where are you going to sleep? And sometimes people may be falling asleep on the couch or other things. No, where are you going to go to sleep at night? Just to set up good habits. Yeah, if you can sleep on the couch and get everything done, knock yourself out. That's fine. There are multiple different ways to do things well. But if you go, I'm sleeping on the couch, but I'm not sleeping that well, maybe it's like, okay, for my nighttime sleeping, I'm getting into the bed as much for the quality of sleep as the behavioral priming and the habit formation of, okay, going into bed starts priming, getting tired. Combating sight pollution. Reorganizing, at least setting up or resetting up your workspace when you're done to be reasonably organized for when you start the next day. This is both pragmatically smart, but also is almost like a ritual for, okay, I'm wrapping up today, I'm leaving the office. Almost like Mr. Rogers walking into his house in the land of make-believe. I guess it wasn't in the land of make-believe, it was in his neighborhood. But he would change into the sweater and sneakers. Then when he went back into the real Mr. Rogers world, he'd put back on the jacket and the real shoes. So that same sort of ritual helps us have dividing lines even within our house. It's not the same, but it helps. And transition to our personal time. And when it comes down to the actual tasks, things that you're doing, as well as the things you might be helping your children with, your teenagers with, lower the bar in terms of what is expected of the task. One, to simplify. Like I said, let's just start with the first 5 pages of the homework. Let's just start with the top rack of the dishwasher. Let me just get to my workstation and review any incoming emails. And after I do that for 10 minutes, I'll go back to the project I was working on. It's also reducing maybe expectations in light of all the stress. And this is more for the parents out there, both for yourself as parents and for your children. I have to look over because I just heard this one from a client yesterday. Expectations are premeditated resentments. It's almost like entrapment. If we're expecting the same performance in the COVID world as before, we're not talking about, oh, yeah, like get drunk around the house or, just curse up a blue star. No, we still have standards, but usually for the task, we're cutting people some slack. So both for individually and for our children, reframe tasks in doable, actionable terms. How do I turn this into something I can do? Doing homework, broad, vague, and non-specific, rereading the last 2 paragraphs I wrote on the paper and then picking up with the next paragraph, that's more actionable. And also the rereading the paragraphs is a more passive entry, something that we know we can do, even if we're not sure we can produce any new text. And all this going back to having enough energy, enough focus, not being in the mood. That's that sufficiency mindset. Rather than, I have to be at my best. No, I just have to be good enough. So everything going on in COVID, it's not the time to start any sort of radically new endeavors. Hey, I really want to start a new exercise routine, or I think we should all go vegan. Now, maybe there is the chance to start some sort of reasonable, hey, let's all go for a walk after dinner. This is a good time to do it. Or I have more time in the morning, maybe to do a remote video class or something like that. There may be opportunities to take advantage of. There may be some deferred projects around the house. Tell you what, that vegetable drawer, which they call the crisper, even though I know all my vegetables eventually go limp in there, but actually pulling it out and cleaning it out. One of those things that we always say, if I ever have time, that's one of the things I'm going to do. Maybe this is the time, maybe not. And for parents, maintaining any behavior plans, any token systems with children, still trying to keep the positive to negative, the positive reinforcement to cost loss ratio at least 3 or 4 to 1. Positive still works better than the negative, but focus on good enough functioning, compassion, support, encouragement, acknowledging it's stressful for everybody, asking for and accepting help when you're stuck, trading off with your co-parent partner, and even when we invariably mess up and overreact, return to positive, make amends, acknowledge that we made a mistake. Even if we say you still have to make your bed, but I was too hard on you. I apologize for that. I need to do a better job. Come back to that set point. So throughout all this, it is maintaining this perspective. We're going to get through this, decatastrophize this as much as we can. There's a lot of negativity going out there, but also we can look at, well, thankfully we're doing okay here. It could be worse, even if things have touched our household, but that sort of gratitude, and there's research beyond ADHD that's a helpful thing. And the valuation, what do we want to focus on here? What are the begin with the end in mind ideas? So with coping with the emotions and the mindset, first, there is just identifying emotionally, what am I feeling? Am I angry? Am I anxious? Am I worried? Am I stressed? Am I feeling it physically? So labeling what we're feeling, even saying it out loud, reduces amygdala functioning and emotional granularity. This is, I hate working from home COVID stress. Putting like that sort of label on it, like in Germany, there's called what's slap in the face anger when you're angry at somebody else. But that granularity, one, saying it and acknowledging it is taking action on it, not slapping somebody in the face, but identifying it chills us out a little bit, or sharing it with somebody. I mean, not yelling and venting, but just saying, hey, I'm really stressed out, and we can get empathy. Identifying what triggered this feeling. And sometimes people will say, I'm overwhelmed by all of it. Well, what is the it? And that might be disentangling many different things. What is the problem that might be causing the anxiety? And are there things, what is the evidence that it is a problem? Maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's something we let go. But if there is a problem, maybe we've been avoiding it, and we have to come up with, all right, how do we actually handle this now? Is the anxiety, and this sort of ties in with the problem, what information, what is the anxiety telling me? Okay, yeah, I've got to get back in touch with the doctor about renewing the prescription. I'm almost out. I have to do this today. Thinking through, all right, what are my worries? What is the absolute worst that could happen? The feared fantasy, okay, if that happens, what's next? If that happens, what's next? And usually the worst case isn't going to happen, but we can pull back to maybe, okay, this is what's coming up next, and this could happen. Any steps I can take? What's the best that might happen? Hey, we might get through this, and maybe I like working from home. Maybe I'll get to still do this for a while. Or, hey, we'll be back and I'll get to see everybody. What's the most likely outcome? What's the most realistic probability? And that's where we want to live, not the possibility of all the things that could go wrong, but let's live in the most likely probabilities. And are there any things I can do? That's another way to deal with anxiety, facing it and taking action. And most of the time we know what it is. We just don't want to do it. It's hard. Studying, calling the prescriber, having to load the new software if we're not technologically proficient. And what are my values that I want to keep to? I want to try to handle this with grace under pressure. And can I manage it? How can I engage and take on the anxiety even while I feel it? And the EXP is exposure. And that's why a lot of treatments for anxiety, the psychosocial treatments, are about exposure. The only way out is through. If you're afraid of flying and you want to fly, either by simulations, video simulators, or actually getting on a flight, eventually you have to face the fear. And also from a coping standpoint, are there any things we can do to modify the situation and make it better? Get better Wi-Fi, refocus our attention. Okay, I don't agree with how the kids are studying, but I need to focus on my work and just, they're doing it their way. They're not listening to me. My way would be better, but let me focus on these things over here. And I gave them the advice. That's all I can do. I'll let them do it their way. And also how we respond and our appraisal, how we're thinking about things, how we're interpreting things. You know what? They're not doing it my way, but they are doing their homework. So I have to focus on the flowers, not the weeds. Activity, movement, note and accept the sensations. Notice what you're feeling and reframing anxiety, stress, sensations. What is my body doing? All right, my heart's racing. I'm clenching. Okay, how can I handle those sensations? Let me just try to go ragdoll and go loose and take a few breaths. It sounds cliche, but they all work. The cliches work. but more formal relaxation, mindfulness. A lot of the mindfulness, commercially available mindfulness apps are probably getting a lot of people, a lot of subscribers now. In dialectical behavior therapy, there's what's called opposite action. You're in the midst of a really stressful situation. Just look at it and give yourself a little half smile. It doesn't have to be a big goofy grin, but it's almost like do the opposite. It's sort of like George Costanza. Instead of tuna salad and being intimidated by women, chicken salad and walking up to them. And it's just sort of like, okay, I'm going to look at this and just smile and handle it the best I can. In terms of cognitive modification, decatastrophizing the thoughts. Okay, this is not great. This is difficult, but it's not a catastrophe. I can manage it. I can tell my boss I'll be late because my children have to be online right now to take their final exam. My boss has children. I'll assume that he or she will understand. Cognitive diffusion is accepting some negative thoughts. Okay, I can go, I don't know when this is going to end. I can't wait, but I can let those thoughts float through my brain and still stay focused on what I need to do. Talking aloud to ourselves. There's research to say that that helps with goal-focused behavior and also just bringing down our anxiety. You know what? This is not going to last forever. We're doing the best we can. Every day we'll chip away and do the best we can and see how this ends up. So that engagement I mentioned before, just rating your anxiety to see the subtle differences. Thinking about your future self, my 4 o'clock self compared with right now. Will I prefer that I didn't do the task and I delayed it till then? Or can I do a little bit of it now and that way at 4 o'clock I can do something else? And that's just a working memory impulse control, but thinking about would I rather do it now or later? Of course, we'd always want to put it later and hopefully that it goes away. But we know that usually there's more, it's better if we work on it sooner. So just briefly, these are a couple things. Russ Barkley and I presented on this a couple last week, but just some of my anxiety. These are just repeats. The other Russ, probably the real Russ, was talking about sheltering at home with an ADHD child. Same thing, a spirit of positivity, working together, breaking down into manageable increments to schedule. Even for young children, you could have a picture schedule of getting up, brushing your teeth, breakfast, school, downtime, walking the dog, whatever the case may be. Don't sweat the schoolwork. Kids will catch up. You know what? It's going to be the COVID generation. That's going to be a ticket out a lot of things. Oh, interviewing at the University of Pennsylvania, incoming freshman. Well, we see back in 2020, your trigonometry in 8th grade wasn't that great. COVID. Come on in. It may not be that easy. I would not have gotten into Penn as a student, but they've got me working for them and I still don't understand it and I'm not drawing attention to it. Movement, avoid burnout between parents, alternate childcare, teaching issues. Everybody needs their own space. There's no trade secrets here. And for adults, this has all been a wild card. Try to solve the problems, but keep the molehills. Don't turn them into mountains. The daily scaffolding, externalize plans so you can see them and refer to them. Stay on medication. Get in touch for your remote psychosocial treatment. This is just from the book. How do we actually do what we need to do? So lastly, you got to take Dramamine when I do a talk. We're at a rush at an end. Begin with the end in mind. So have the spirit of what you want to do. But when it comes down to the actual task, you have to start with the beginning in mind. Make it small, make it actionable, and engage. And things will go a whole lot better. And that's what we're just talking about. Good enough. And for parents, there's a lot of research on good enough parenting is all your kids need. So with that, these are the references in case you want to track down the work by all us geeks. And that's it.
Oh, it was excellent. Yes, you did speed it up at the end, but you got a lot in.
Just like Barack Obama, really slow at the beginning and speed it up at the end. Anyway, for what it's worth.
A couple people want to know if they're taking ADHD medication, will it help with their anxiety levels?
It should. There can be idiosyncratic, because stimulants, it is like caffeine. And some people will say, I'm already anxious, and putting caffeine on top of anxiety, and even with ADHD meds, some people will have, every brain is different, some people will have an idiosyncratic response where they say, I have more focus, but I'm just too jittery. And so that would be weighing the pros and cons with their prescriber, maybe taking a blood pressure just to see if it's actually translating into an increase in blood pressure, which some people have, and whether it may be for the first half hour until it gets metabolized a little bit, or it's just like the whole dose. So that's something that can be worked out with the prescriber. There are many non-stimulant options that could be fallbacks, or a different preparation of a stimulant. Now, I'm a Ph.D., not an M.D., so don't sue me, but this is sort of, I think, decent practice and in the literature. But also some people say that the medication, the stimulant, even though you feel the stimulant, it helps me focus and I feel more on top of things. And if my anxiety, at least partly, if not the majority, is coming from the worry about the consistent inconsistency, once I feel more consistently consistent and on top of things, now my anxiety is going down because things aren't as stressful when they come on. It's not like, oh no, how am I going to get this done? It's sort of like, okay, I can focus. I know the coping skills. I'll be able to use them. I can approach this in a more, not totally Zen, but Zen fashion. So it depends, but a lot of times it can actually help reduce anxiety. But you got to monitor and work with your prescriber.
Mm-hmm. A few people have asked about diagnoses of ADHD and anxiety. One person says, I was diagnosed with having anxiety before officially receiving my ADHD diagnosis. What are some indicators that someone actually has both?
The one main thing I would say, with most of the anxiety disorders, it's very situational or discrete, like panic disorder. Like sometimes I'll ask somebody if they've ever had panic attacks and they go, I'm not sure. And then I go, and this is overly glib, I'm not this glib. Well, then you didn't have one, because if you have a panic attack, you know. So panic disorder, it's very circumscribed. If you have a simple phobia, fear of flying, it's only when you're face-to-face with the plane or the prospect of getting on the plane. Social anxiety, it's the problems only when you're around other people or you have to perform. So with anxiety and the executive function self-regulation model of ADHD, we all have executive functions. So somebody in the midst of a major depression who does not have ADHD, their executive functioning goes down, but as mood improves, it goes back to a normal baseline. Same with anxiety. Usually when there's coexisting anxiety, when somebody's not facing anxiety, they still notice all the same procrastination, disorganization, focusing, distractibility, all the classic symptoms persist. Even when somebody says, I was on vacation and I still couldn't focus on reading a book or help my children with their math homework, even when I'm really not thinking about work or not worried about doing my presentation, these things, usually even with a developmental interview, when did your symptoms start? Even if you weren't diagnosed with ADHD in childhood, I mean, one, maybe you don't have ADHD, but usually we can see the onset of some, even if they didn't necessitate treatment or create like failing out of school problems, we can see the onset of the executive function and symptoms before the onset of anxiety. That's another clue, because you know, depression and anxiety are the common cold of clinical psychology and psychiatry. So everybody gets trained in them, but so people see them first, but may not catch the ADHD. But childhood onset of ADHD symptoms and persistent of the executive functioning problems in the absence of an anxiety, of the feelings of anxiety, that's another clue that ADHD might be going on separate from the effects of anxiety.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What is the best therapy for managing anxiety? Is there a suite of therapies out there that can be... Go ahead.
Right. No, I would say the broad family of cognitive behavioral therapies, and I know Attitude Magazine's had at the very least had a story on dialectical behavior therapy, which is already a treatment for borderline personality disorder and parasuicidal behaviors. Marsha Linehan was the developer of it, and Alexandra Philipson in Germany modified it. Her and colleagues modified it for ADHD. You know, and all of this is variations on a theme of the coping skills, and a line I'm probably using for the third time, if not the fourth time today. There's no trade secrets. Hey, tell you what, the Harvard CBT team doesn't know procrastination is part of ADHD. Don't tell them. We talk about that. They don't. No, we all talk about the stuff. So it's variations on a theme. So there's different flavors, though, where dialectical behavior therapy, even some of the things I mentioned today that we weave into ours, they might do that in a larger font and then devote a whole session to it in their group DBT, at least the time-limited groups. So within the cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's not in the theme, but that also addresses the emotional regulation. It's really about, I think ours really focuses on the implementation even more, but it's all about the skills and the use of the skills. So the cognitive behavioral treatments. Now, within these treatments, Lydia Zylowska and John Mitchell will have a book coming out about their group mindfulness meditation adapted for ADHD. Lydia has a great book already out there. So she's just trying to corner the market. It's, sort of running up the score, I think. No, she's great, and it's great stuff. And it's going to be a great book, which you can adapt as part of individual treatment. So that's another layer of it. ADHD coaching is sort of related. It's not CBT, but there's overlap with it. So sometimes people augment, and we're just talking about the psychosocial treatments, right, augment their individual treatments with these sort of other supports that might have more flexibility for remote services, being able to check in by FaceTime and stuff like that. But there are no trade secrets. There's other things being studied about groups like Mary Salanto's group, which is great, versus individual, and sort of more fine-tuning groups for college students. I think Arthur Anastopoulos down at University of North Carolina has published their treatment. I think it's the Access program, about a hybrid of individual and group treatment so it's really this expanding of the cognitive behavioral treatments. And, I'm totally biased, but the research backs it up. And within APA and APA, the American Psychological Association, it is considered an evidence-supported treatment. And I would imagine other ones that come around, they whatever they call them, they'll probably have to be variations on that theme about the implementation. We don't treat the symptoms of ADHD. I'm not looking at somebody saying, look at my nose for 15 seconds. Now take a break. Now let's see if we can get it for 25 seconds before the end. And then, okay, this will all be good. No, we're dealing with time management, procrastination, planners. We're focused on the problems, the compensatory coping skills with ADHD. That's what the psychosocial treatments target.
Mm-hmm. A lot of spouses have talked about their other spouses here, and they're asking a question. They believe their spouse is anxious, very anxious, and has ADHD. And they wondered if there's an anger rage connection with anxiety, because they seem to note that their spouse gets angry in a second. Is this a separate issue? Does this spring out of anxiety?
This is part of the emotional discontrol. And not knowing anything about individual cases, a common scenario will be, so like we said, ADHD creates uncertainty. Uncertainty is a core piece of anxiety. And then what happens then in a committed relationship? I mean, this could be workplace, this could be friends, but let's just say a co-parenting romantic relationship with or without co-parenting. Then now all of a sudden there's a scorecard for our like ADHD mess ups. And it has ripple effects on other people, and it becomes more obvious. It's bad enough when we see it. We get the added ticket from the officer, not just for speeding, but now we realize we never got our inspection done. So anger is so the core theme of anxiety is uncertainty. The core theme of anger, from annoyance up to rage, is lack of fairness. Something's unfair. Or our rights are being violated. Now, that unfairness can be self-directed, or it can be the fairness like, well, if all the other people driving here, you have to pull me over, and it's only because you pulled me over when everybody else is speeding that you happen to see this, and I have ADHD, but you're still giving me a ticket. Or it is self-directed anger. I can't believe I did that again. What's wrong with me? It goes back to one of the first books. You mean I'm not lazy, stupid, or crazy? Because those are the internal attributions, and sometimes it's self-directed anger, and then we hear from it from our partner, or we engage in mind reading, which is the #1 cognitive distortion in committed relationships. I just know he or she's going to bring this up. It can be this preemptive strike. I know I messed up. What about what you did or whatever? So that's a very long-winded, sort of like a one-man show on Broadway. But a one-man show of that is one scenario where it can come up, and very often it's rooted in self-frustration, or sometimes, it's somebody not yet having been diagnosed with ADHD and just saying, you have to understand me better, and externalizing blame. And it can be a little bit of both. You know what? I have to use my coping skills, maybe take medications, or at least go in and talk with somebody about this. And there is that sort of working together, the non-ADHD partner or two partners just recognizing, okay, this isn't personal. These slip-ups will happen. Let's work together to try to reduce them and trade duties. Okay, you're getting frustrated with the kids. I'm sorry, I should pick up. Or, okay, it's about time we hand off. Let's help each other out.
Right. One person says, what do we do when we're anxious about events we can't prevent/control? Should we try to ignore them or prepare the best we can?
It depends what it is,
Right.
but without a specific example, you know what? It goes back to the serenity prayer, and I'm going to butcher it somehow, but it's let me accept the things I cannot change, change the things I can, and know the difference. So it is running through and saying, is there anything else we can do to change this or modify it, including asking for help? Hey, I know it's this. I know we're already 3 weeks late. Is there anything that can be done? Just so you can get, and it's a cliche, but there's something true to it, get closure. Okay, we tried everything, so now we're going to deal with reality. How do we make the best of it or make the least bad of it? And the truth is sometimes, that's why we, at least when I think about it, we don't call it problem solving. We call it problem management, because problem solving, okay, you get audited by the IRS. I want them to go away and leave me alone. Okay, well, that's one solution, but it's not going to happen. But how can we be prepared, get an accountant, get somebody to help us who knows what they're doing, and manage it the best we can, and try to reduce the negativity and get back to the positives as quickly as we can, and managing a poor hand well.
Right. I've always liked that. This poor man, my anxiety, man, I have ADHD and anxiety, and my anxiety is manifested as an upset stomach. So I've had a stomach ache for over 3 months now while dealing with COVID. Any advice on how to alleviate that? I know this is. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just speaking in general terms, I can't give any specific advice, but in general terms, this would be one, if you have a prescriber or a general practitioner, even some sort of, there are many good, I won't say stress management, anxiolytic medications that can help with some of these physiological stress reactions. This would be tailor-made for mindfulness. Many chronic medical conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, with or without ADHD, respond well to these very body-focused interventions. It can sound hokey. You don't have to buy in with you don't have to be a Tibetan monk or anything. You can just say, hey, slowing the breathing down, the exercises work. You don't have to buy into the philosophy. If you do, that's fine. And I'm not anti any of this stuff, but it's just sort of like, when used, these things can help relax the body and more efficiently develop the habit of getting to that relaxation response quicker. Mm-hmm. So those would be two quick ones. And also talking about with somebody, be it a therapist or a friend, about what is stressing you out, and handwriting it out are other ways to discharge it, at least a little bit.
Yes. Lastly, I hope this isn't too large a question. I wanted to squeak one more in. Any specific diet, food, herb, etc., to reduce anxiety, or is there no connection there?
I wouldn't say there's any reliable thing. I mean, I would watch your caffeine intake, because sometimes working from home, without the commute, maybe you don't get to the office till 9, but now you're starting to work like 6 a.m. because you just wake up. That's when you typically catch the train. So maybe you start throwing down coffee sooner than usual. So just being mindful of that. Healthy eating in general, things that you're not going to have reactions to, but generally in terms of anything prescriptive, some teas, decaffeinated would probably be the things, just being mindful of your food intake and just eating habits. Because sometimes people, it's like, I ate too late, and then that's the food reaction.
Right.
But prescriptively, really nothing that comes to mind other than, and I forget the common sleep. I forget. It's thing our brain develops, but middle-aged memory. Thank you.
Yeah.
Things like that. But other than those things that are already out there, nothing really comes to mind.
Okay. Well, I think the hour is up. That was great. I know I'm a little calmer as a result of this. Lots of strategies. So really, thank you for being here and sharing your expertise, Russ. So.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yep. And everyone, thanks for being here. The attendees, please join us next week when Sharon Salim will talk about saving our summer, a parent's guide to daily routines, screen limits, and safe social outings. Thanks everyone for being here, and have a great day.